Hey Patrick, how's it going, my friend?
Doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for joining me on Dads with Mikes. Today's topic is one that I can really relate to. We're going to talk about burnout,
Hmm.
which is something I think I went through a couple of years ago. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear your perspective on it. But before we get into it, tell us a little bit about yourself, how old you are, how many kids you got, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thanks for the invite. And yeah, so I am 39. I'll be 40 in May. We have my wife and I, Alicia, have two kids right now. We're hoping to bump that up. And kids are 3.5 and one, just turned one, and it's a boy and a girl. So
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I have two kids as well. They're 7 and 4, and it's a boy and a girl. And yeah, I really like that mix. It's a great dynamic to have one of both. And every time somebody asks me, "Are you having more?" I could say, "No, I have one of each." So we're all set.
Yeah, there is a nice kind of balance feel to it, but we have one female cat, so now it's three females to two males. So we're going to try to level that out here. So
Oh yeah, there you go.
we're four or five if we're lucky, total for kids. So
Cool. God bless, man. That's awesome.
yeah, thanks.
Patrick, let me know. What do you? I saw on your X profile that you're a psychotherapist and personality researcher.
Hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what that means?
Yeah, so I'm in the States first and foremost, and I did a career switch into mental health after coming into contact with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and kind of spoke to my natural proclivity of, I guess, being a guy who enjoys being a coach or helper, and so I jumped into that. So I am actually a licensed, and so in America you have 50 states, and they all do things differently. So some of that's cool, some of it's maddening, but in terms of healthcare, it's like every state has their own licensing procedure. And then, of course, within the realm of mental health, you have all of these different delineations or acronyms that all mean the same thing. So I'm in Virginia, so I'm a licensed professional counselor, right? But we also have like licensed mental health therapist. These are all sort of the same thing. And then the loose term is psychotherapist. That's usually a little bit more well known to the broader, community.
Right.
It just literally means somebody who helps with the brain, right? Um, and so, yes, and the whole thing that got me down this journey was this idea of personality, specifically the Big Five, 10 aspect model of personality. Totally blew my mind. The university that I went to here in Virginia, they were one of the few universities that actually had a master's in science program for me, which was super important because I wanted to bring a level of research and rigor um, to my feet to the field. So that was really great. A lot of these degrees are masters of arts. Again, no major problem with that. But for me, I wanted a master's of science, and they enabled me to bring in all of this stuff that I was interested in terms of personality research, positive and negative emotion, a lot of the lab stuff that I do with my clients. And yeah, they were really great. So then I was able to add a nice clinical licensure to the scope of tools and that I have. So it was really nice.
Okay. And why the focus on burnout?
Yeah. So when I started thinking about the word burnout, and this is just something that I hope can naturally come in our conversation. I mean, even after the video is done, because I'd love to hear how people are defining that. Um, I was trying to figure out what we even meant by burnout, because that can be super tricky. And so I've been trying to figure out, okay, how can I put the word burnout into a very practical approach for dads. And so I was thinking, okay, well, I feel like in some degree, burnout has a thread to motivation, right? And so it's like if you're burned out, maybe the motivational energy that you have is decreased. So that was sort of like one thought that I have. Then I was like, well, there's also sort of like an element of like physical fatigue, right? There's a physiological component to that. I mean, as well as motivation. And then I thought, if burnout goes too long, you start getting manifestations of like depression, right? Where it's sort of like a culmination of mind body withdrawal, right? And that can have like irritability attached to it. It can have frustration, annoyance, and sometimes even anger, depending on the individual. But to me, I was thinking, okay, that that looks and feels like what I mean by burnout.
Okay. Because that's a good point. Because I mean, a lot of people will use it lightly, right? They'll be in conversations with work colleagues and say, "Oh man, I'm burning out."
Hmm.
But I mean, are you really though? It's just one of those things that people say, and they don't actually mean it. Like, oh, like they talk about something bad that happened in their past, and oh, I'm traumatized. Are you really traumatized though? you know.
Right.
So what symptoms can we look out for to say, you know what? No, I think I'm headed there.
Right. One of the things, that I think is helpful is that it's very normal to have like long days and tired days, especially when you're in the toddler's realm of and that's where I am. Like I'm in toddler and baby realm, but I think just in kids in general, just the family life. Those are exhausting days. They're just very exhausting. And but then there's a difference between being tired and having chronic fatigue, where
Right.
it's all the time. So how would I then define chronic fatigue? Well, for me personally, it was two periods of the day that really to me were sort of like a highlight. One is the morning time. What is your initial response to either your alarm going off or a child coming through your door at 5 or 5:30 in the morning? And and then what are the emotions that follow that immediately? And then what does the first hour after wake up look like? So
Okay.
that was like one area because I feel, for example, that's a great way to test test where your a litmus test for your attitude, you know, something uncontrollable, something unexpected, and usually at a time that you don't want. And then the other time was like the 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. It was like that last countdown with the kids. And it was like, how do we have our family oriented during those times? And what are we doing? And this could be, things that I would double check for me and my wife. It's like, are we on our phones during that time? Do we
Right.
have the TV on? Are we just sitting in the house? It's like, and of course, depending on where you are with the age of your child, those things are going to look different. And so those were kind of two periods of my day that I was looking at where I thought, I don't know if I like how I feel during those time periods. I don't know if I like my reactions during those time periods. And because I'm a father and you know my wife and I have some ownership in leading the family, I didn't know if I liked how as a dad I was leading the masculine part of our family during those times. And so that
Yeah.
was sort of like the checks and balances for me.
The morning test, let's start with that one because let's face it, not a whole lot of people can say that they wake up in the morning feeling energized and
Yes,
ready to go and
terrifies me.
motivated. And look, I was one of those people not too long ago, just a couple of years ago. And for me, it's mostly work related.
Mm,
Uh, I've spoken about it on X a lot. I posted about it quite regularly that I currently dislike my job, and
hmm.
that's putting it lightly. So for me, it's a work related type of situation.
Hmm.
And about 2 years ago, I got to a point where I opened my laptop one day, my work laptop, and I just started crying.
Hmm.
Tears were flowing. I was not having it that day,
Yeah.
and I immediately shut my computer and I went to bed. And my wife came to see me and like asking me like what's going on, and I told her like I can't do this anymore.
Hmm.
I can't do this job anymore.
Hmm.
And so it started a whole process of me asking for help at work. HR, they have an employee assistance program. Fortunately, that helped me get in touch with a therapist.
Hmm.
And we started the steps towards seeing what could be done in terms of a sick leave.
Mm,
That was the initial thought there with HR and the employee assistance program, and the therapist, immediately asking me questions like, "Are you eating well? Or are you getting enough sleep? How's your mood?" And the thing is, and at the beginning of this recording, I told you that I think I had a burnout. And the reason I say that is because through the whole process that we went through with HR and the therapist and all that, uh, they didn't end up giving me a sick leave of more
mm,
than a month.
mm.
And that's because they deemed it that I was not actually experiencing depression. They call it a case of you're just tired of your job, so you should find something else, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that, I mean, I was honest with them. A lot of people will ask for sick leave and be dishonest and say, yeah, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I'm not playing with my kids. And the truth is, and this, I told them, I was completely transparent with them when they were asking me the questions to determine how severe my case was. I told them, no, I can still eat, which I did. I was still working out. you know, I
Right, right.
I still wanted to keep the time to do my workouts, my weekly workouts, which was 3 or 4 times a week. And I still, time with my family was a little bit affected, but not that much because I was making it a point not to let my work affect my family life.
Sure.
I did not want to be that guy. I didn't want to be the guy that took his work home, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, my wife noticed it a little bit, but I was still playing with my kids. I was still happy around them because I was forcing myself to be.
Right.
So I told them all that, and it was determined, well, you're not depressed, so we're not going to give you an extension on your sick leave. This was after a month. And so I was left to myself, basically, to try to get myself out of it.
Yes.
And that's when I ended up taking a sabbatical
Mm,
from work, non-paid, of
mm-hmm.
course,
Right.
entirely through my own budget. That year was an eye-opener for me.
Mm,
But a lot of people, look, it's to get back to my initial point. When they wake up in the morning, who can say, "Oh man, I can't wait to go work"? The percentage on that for me is what, maybe 20%.
hmm.
I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. How many people can say, if you have to give it a number, how many people wake up in the morning and say, "Oh man, yeah, let's do it. Can't wait to go to work."
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have an answer for you for that because that's, I mean, that I hear in your story with the way that you were, you know, uh, meeting the negative emotion, and that to me is a very helpful way to categorize. And hopefully this is helpful for guys. I mean, I'd love a bigger conversation, just to understand how people are processing. But essentially, it's, how is the negative emotion that you are experiencing affecting you directly? And so, for example, uh, one of the things that's very helpful that I tell clients is when we look at you know, the human body, right? Why do we have emotions? We have positive emotion, we have negative emotion. Well, a really great rule of thumb to help is that your um, your intrinsic personality, right, generates motivation. Motivation or goals. And we actually have no idea where that comes from, by the way, which I absolutely love. But it's like it's like the ether into the void, right?
Yeah.
Or the muse or the Holy Spirit or whatever. But we really don't. I mean, other than our base level motivations of like eat, sleep, safety, we don't really know where our intrinsic motivations come from, other than they do, and it's tied to temperament to some degree. But your emotions act as guardrails for your motivations, and that's a good rule of thumb, right? So positive emotion essentially means that you are making adequate progress towards your goals, and negative emotion means that you have somehow gotten off of your goals, right? So if I have clients come to me and they experience something like you, like you have, which is very common, by the way. It's sort of like, well, let's try to see if we can actually put a name to the negative emotion that we're feeling and then link it back to a motivation. And I'll just give you a few examples. Let me know if this is helpful. But for example, like if you're experiencing frustration, that essentially means that your brain is perceiving that a goal is blocked, right? You're
Right.
trying to acquire something, but it's being blocked. You're being frustrated. Disappointment is that a motivation or a goal has the wrong outcome. If you're experiencing something like grief, it could be that the goal has been lost. Um, and then you have things like anxiety, pain, and fear, which deal with the goal of avoiding pain or damage. And sometimes those can overlap. And so then you get things like irritability, self consciousness, and insecurity, which are all forms of negative emotion. And so a lot of times, what ends up happening is that sometimes people don't have their goals clearly articulated enough. So it lives in the internal world, right? The unconsciousness, if you will, so that you just start experiencing all these negative emotions and you don't know why. And really the root of it is that the goals that are orienting your life have not been clearly articulated by yourself. And so your brain knows that. And that's why you get flooded with that negative emotion. And so a lot of times with my clients, I tend to start there to try to piece that together in their own words.
Okay. So, and you mentioned that it's very common to
Mm-hmm.
have work related burnout.
Mm-hmm.
What do people usually end up doing? Is it a career shift that's required? Is it just trying to tolerate what they're doing because that's all they've known? And because I don't hear personally, I don't hear a lot about people actually leaving their field of work and
Right.
doing something entirely different because that's what they've always dreamt of.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what ends up being the course of action in that case?
Yeah. So I tend to have all my clients run through. I've automated this test. It's public, it's free, but we've added some clever things to it. But we have people go through, I have my clients go through something called the Big Five 10 aspect model of personality, which is really the only empirical scientific model of personality that we have. And there's some great work being done there that's kind of mapping that onto the neurobiology. But essentially what I do is I have people take this test and then I see if their temperament or their personality has actually matches up with their job, because a lot of times it does not. And I'll give you a kind of a quick example of this, but
Sure.
one of the traits that people that we all share is something called extroversion. That breaks down into assertiveness, and enthusiasm, and that's kind of a marker for positive emotion and how you experience positive emotion. Well, people who are very high in extroversion tend to do very well in sales, right, or in leadership positions. But if they are low in extroversion, or maybe they're introverted and they find themselves in a job that requires a lot of social interaction, like I'm being a manager, right, or being
Yeah.
in sales or doing something, it actually drains them. And what happens, especially in the corporate world, is that people end up getting mismatched in the job roles that they have because people think that, for example, I see this all the time with managers when I'm trying to help. Sometimes I will consult with businesses on this, but a lot of times, like they will find somebody in their profession in the job that like everybody likes because they're very agreeable, which is another marker of the personality traits, and they're very compassionate and they're very polite. And usually, those are the people you do not want in management because it eats at them. They don't actually like doing it, but they don't say no very well. Agreeable people don't. They tend to say yes more than they say no.
Right.
So they do the job anyway, and then when they land up in that particular management role, it kills them. They're actually bad at it. It costs the company money. And so again, to answer your question, I like having people understand what their baseline temperament is, see if it matches up with their job first and foremost. Then the second thing that I like doing is I like looking at what I just kind of anecdotally call pillars of life, right? For example, it's like, how are you doing as an individual, let's say with self-care, and we'll put everything under self-care, right?
Yeah.
Lifting weights, eating healthy, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, okay, how are your intimate relationships doing, right? How are your family and friendships doing? What's your community? What are your hobbies? And so forth. And so you kind of look at these massive, robust pillars that people should have in their life, um, and see if any of those are cracking, right? So, are you in a job, that are you educated enough? Like this happens a lot, right? So you actually have people who are too smart for the job they're in, right?
Yeah.
But they don't. But the problem is, and you said something very profound earlier, and I hope people hear it. It's like, oh, most people don't, and that gets into an issue where a lot of people don't like changing what they know because it is nested inside multiple high level problems. So, for example, to say, oh, I might switch my job, right, is to say, oh, well, do I have a resume or my CV? And is it up to date or is it polished? And who in the hell wants to do like even open that and look at it? I mean, seriously, resumes are a pain in the butt.
Yeah, they are.
And the older you get, the more you try to do, your career shifts. It's like, well, now it's like, you send out 100 resumes, you might get 2 interviews, right? And so it's the waiting game, and so what happens is, and one of the things that we looked at too is like, okay, well, do you have any reason to be resentful in the current job that you're in? And so a lot of times it might be pay or it might be responsibility. And it's like, okay, when was the last time you tried to negotiate a raise for yourself? And again, that goes back to their temperament. And a lot of people don't like doing that because A, confrontation in and of itself is usually not very enjoyable to go through or to practice. And B, you have to actually be ready to leave your job,
Yeah.
right? So when I was in the corporate world and I managed a group of 10, I always asked them when the last time they did an interview was. I was like, hey, polish, because I really wanted to make sure that we had people on the team that wanted to be there. And I would encourage people, man. It's like, you need to go out and just do some interviews. You don't have to take the job because everybody gets so scared. They're like, oh my God, if I do this interview and they offer me the job, then I have to say yes. And then I have to, and they get into this like premeditated stance. I'm like, you can always just say no. And who knows, you might find out that the grass is pretty green on this side, so, yeah. So we do exercise. And so I do that with people in my office, actually at the clinic where I'm at right now. And it's like, we'll do it on the phone, baby steps at a time, fill out the applications, and go through. And so again, in regards to doing shifts and, is the job that I'm doing right now good enough for me? It could be like, well, maybe it's not. Do you need to go back to school? Are you actually smarter than you're giving yourself credit for? Can we equip you with better tools to make you more valuable to the market? And when was the last time, and you kind of said this a little bit earlier with your own story, when was the last time you took a couple of days off just to meander pointlessly through the woods to figure out what you even like?
Yeah.
you know?
But that's the thing too with the corporate world is that you have what 2 weeks of vacation per year.
Oh yeah.
You got the weekends, but I mean that's 2 days out of 7. You're working 50 weeks out of 52.
Right.
And so what are you doing? You spend Monday to Friday just waiting for the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
You're spending the entire year waiting for that 2 week summer vacation.
Right.
So the majority of your time is spent doing something that you're not passionate about.
Right.
And that was the case for me. I was not taking enough days off. I was not in tune with what I wanted to do. And look, if we get into the whole, do what you love,
Mm-hmm.
which is, a very old cliche.
Sure. What does it even mean?
Yeah,
Do
what
you
does it
even know
mean?
what you love? See, I don't even think people know what they love. So
Yeah, that's another thing. Do people actually think about that? Do they reflect on it? I don't know. And what does it mean? I mean, look, for me, it was, I was working in the banking operations field. Really nothing fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Compliance work at a bank. And it got to a point where I was asking myself on a regular basis, what am I doing here?
Mm.
what kind of work am I doing? What's my contribution to society?
Mm.
And I had the answer to those questions, which to me was nothing. What am I doing here? Well, we're working for a big bank. I'm helping other banks and financial institutions make money. It's one thing if you work maybe at the branch level and I don't know, you're a credit officer and you're handing out loans to new immigrants who want to open a restaurant or something.
Mm-hmm.
There's some value in that. You're helping people live their dream to own a restaurant maybe.
Right.
But at my level, it was not even close to that. It was just brokers and financial institutions and foreign banks and dealing with them. Really nothing fulfilling about it for me. Look, I don't want to dump on the whole field or
Sure.
or my colleagues. Maybe they're passionate about the work, but I
Right.
mean, I doubt it.
Well,
But
but again, temperament really does play a large role in that. So I'll give you, just as interesting. My dad is actually a banker, and he is a lifelong banker. He's been a banker since he was, I guess 18, since he could first work, and he stayed in
wow,
banking from 18. And he just retired, and good for him. And and he, is very interesting because our temperaments are very, very different in this. And to him, it was, he was very glad to retire, obviously. And it's not like he was in love with his job, but that type of corporate structure, with all the goods and bads, he was able to, it meant a lot to him to be able to have that and for it to offer the support that it did. And so, but you seem, my good man, to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, and you seem to be very open. And openness is one of the other traits of the big five. And the higher you are in openness, man, the more you have a extreme dislike to, the corporate. I don't want to use the word rat race. It's more of like, here is the path that we want you to take. Do not deviate from it. And that's probably maddening to you to some degree, especially if you saw a problem and had a creative solution, and that's just going to tick off your bosses. They're like, just shut up and do what we asked you to do, man.
yeah, pretty much. But you're spot on with this assessment. Is and that's actually one of the reasons why I started a podcast.
Yes.
It's to get away from that banking world that I'm still in it, by the way. I took a sabbatical, like I mentioned. Through this sabbatical, this year that I took off, there was no conclusion that came from it. There's no breakthrough in terms of, oh, yes, okay, now I know what to do, what kind of job to apply for, what kind of profession to have. So it ended with me going back to work, to the same job, in a different role, but the same team, just because it's what I knew.
Mm-hmm.
So comfort zone there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was okay. I felt okay doing it and going back because then I was equipped with a new goal, which was to find my calling. And at that point, I had built great habits of, daily walks, exercising more frequently and consistently, more time in nature, reading books, listening to podcasts, that sort of thing, as opposed to spending my evenings, in front of Netflix eating chips.
Right.
Which was me just before that. So I went back, but with these new healthy habits, and I knew what to look out for, not to let myself burn out again. So this is where I am now. I'm still at the bank. But again, one of the reasons why I started the podcast is for that reason. I didn't have anything else going on back then. It was, I'm a banker and I'm a father, and there was nothing else. But now I do the podcast. I volunteer once a month.
Excellent.
I read. I take walks. I exercise frequently, and these things help me. Now, some people are going to say, "Well, that's great, but these are just, I think, coping mechanisms." But you didn't get to the root of the issue there, which was you don't like your job. So what are you doing about it? And this is where I am right now. But, doing this right here, this conversation with you, my friend, is like one of the best parts of my week.
Yeah.
Because it's having conversations like this that give me a sense of purpose. So what do you think about that? Am I doing the right thing, or did I not address the issue like some may seem to think?
Yeah, no, I think I gave you A+ on the route that you take. You know,
Thanks.
yeah, and so because it's always a lot more nuanced than that. And when you start diving into the research of the entrepreneurial life or the creative life, what it's terrifying. It's not meant to scare anyone away, but there is a very real aspect that the majority of the majority of the people that are on the planet are not creative, even if they think they are. Of the people who are actually creative, the ability to monetize that creativeness, dude, you're looking at maybe 5%,
Right. If
right?
that.
And so people are probably familiar with this. They're probably familiar with Pareto's distribution, or the more elegant version of Pareto's distribution, which is Price's law. It's a great law. You start seeing like, well, wait a minute, the old adage of the starving artist is a real thing. And so if you fancy yourself a writer or a novelist or a musician or whatever you are trying to create, especially when you're in the throes of familyhood, it is very, it's very hard to say, well, I'm going to throw all my money into this, all my time into this, and hope for the best. And there is a little bit of naivety to that, because there are very real things like the electric bill that don't, like, they're not optimistic. They don't care what you're choosing to do.
Yeah.
Um, and so, it's kind of like those are the things that you need to get paid, that you need to pay. And so, first and foremost, the best thing that you can do as a father is offer a level of stability and environment for your children, regardless of how you feel to some degree, right? That is somewhat of a sacrifice. And then, that's kind of one element to that. You're being a provider, and being a provider for your family I mean, that's a biblical, ethic, right? And
Yeah.
so but there's very real sacrifice in doing that. And so with a lot of my more creative or open clients, it's like, okay, well, we need to get you a regular 9 to 5. We need to stabilize your environment. You do your hobby on your side to the best of your ability until it takes off, because you need to be a functioning member of society. Because, and this, I don't know if this is helpful to you, people who are higher in trait openness, like yourself, if they don't create, they tend to wither. And so it's like, okay, well, then now you need to learn to negotiate with yourself. In other words, you need to say, well, how much do I need to be creating each week or each month? And how do I set time to do that? And then if that allows you to flourish, because creative people need to create as a part of their intrinsic value, doesn't matter if it gets published, they just need to write or draw or whatever. Um, they may only need that to reestablish, let's call it, that homeostasis, right? Oh, I can tolerate my job now. And that's why you get the A+, right? Because if you can tolerate your job, you still have the ability to provide with your family. And so you want to make sure that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And, one of the reasons that I'm trying to navigate, let's say I'm primarily concentrating with X in terms of social media, because I don't like a lot of them. It wears me out. But it's like I'm seeing a lot of I'm seeing a huge push of masculinity, which is a good thing, but it tends to be laced in, like you said, these colloquialisms that don't actually mean anything, and even if they did, they don't have any practical substance of of what it is. And Andrew Huberman, for those that are familiar with him, he had a great line that I've really just stolen. Which is, he's like, everyone is trying to optimize everything. You hear this, right? In the biohacking world, you're just like, well, we need to optimize our day, and we want to optimize our metabolism, and we want to optimize our time together. He said something to the effect of, well, you can actually optimize yourself into failure. That if anyone tries to Google that quote, it doesn't exist. That's a summary of what he said. you
Okay.
know but essentially that's true, because like, do I have a cold immersion tub outside right now? Yes, I do. Do I have my red light infrared panels over here? Yes, I do. do I have infrared sauna? Am I trying that stuff? Yes, I am. It's like, have I tried peptides? Yes, I have. It's like, and so, but it's like you can optimize all of those things, and they can still be left without heart and soul to some degree. Um, because if you know that you feel like you need to do ice plunge and wait 90 minutes for your caffeine intake, and then do your red light, and then do motivational meditation, and then do your gratitude journal all before your kids wake up, and I don't know, you have a kid who wakes up 1 hour early, you're going to be pissed. Now, you may not say that, but deep down, you're like, well, my optimization routine just got hijacked.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, tell me how. Well, I guess you're not optimized because you're angry that your optimization got jacked. And so I think one of the things that has happened in the social media landscape, especially with the ability of knowledge to be spread as quickly as it does, some of these terms and good behaviors are starting to become sleight of hands. It's almost like a magic show. Let me say this really cool thing that seems interesting, but then when you try to put legs on it, is it actually accomplishing that which it's supposed to for you?
Right.
Andrew Huberman is not married and does not have kids, right? Andrew Huberman lives in the lab by his own admission, and he's great at it, but
Yeah.
he doesn't have 5 kids that he's trying to raise, and I think a lot of the way, and he's admitted this himself. This is not a shot at anybody. He's excellent. I'm just saying, when you look at him, it's like you can't mimic his life. He would say the same thing. And try to incorporate all of these quote unquote protocols in your life, you'll just go mad, or even look at, I think one of here's another helpful rule, and this is really fascinating, but to be self-conscious, right, is to increase your negative emotion. That's fascinating. So the more and this is now I'm a mental health professional. This is something that makes me angry with my own profession. I try to educate on it as much as I can. But if you have clients and you bring them in and you have them sit down and just think about themselves, do you know what increases? Negative emotion. Now, there are times for that, obviously, reflection. But the longer you stay in a self-contemplative state, the more critical you become, and Freud might call that the superego, the more judgmental you might become on yourself,
No, that's a great point, because you hear a lot more about it now, how mental health professionals are not focusing on the habits. And doctors too, actually, not
Yep.
just mental health professionals, but doctors too. First thing they'll think about doing is giving you a pill, as opposed to looking at your habits.
Yes.
Now,
And
do you feel like that's still very much the case in today's world?
it's even more the case than ever there was a case. It's actually why my wife and I started the 2 businesses that we do. So she focuses in autoimmunity, specifically within Hashimoto's, and it's because she has it, and no one was there to help her. So she paved her own way, right?
Okay.
And that's what I've done in the mental health realm. And so our businesses are tied, and I tend to focus on males. I'm trying to help dads because that's just something that I think might be interesting. We'll see if it's helpful. But essentially what we've tried to do is I try to fancy myself as a root cause practitioner, and what do I mean by root causes is there a way that we can look at your mind, your body, and your vision? All 3 of those things to me are sort of the loose parameters of being. Okay, that's not meant to be philosophical, but just in terms of a helpful metaphor. And
Okay.
and we are able to do things that providers will not do. And we have friends and family who are going through situations where they're feeling this burnout, right? They're defining the burnout as not having the energy or the enjoyment to do the things that they think they should, right? And they're very tired, and they're drained, and they're still living life. They still enjoy hanging out with their friends, but there's this, it's like it hurts. There's some pain. Maybe it's chronic. And so what do you do? And the doctors are like, here, you take this. And so my wife and I are able to offer, different types of lab work, we're really big into like inflammation and the gut brain axis. And how that works. And so we really try to help people with that. Medically, we look at, different specific, blood panels, and then She goes off on her Hashimoto's journey, and she's a registered dietitian too. So she tends to she does a very great job of healing people with food, which is great. And then I try to heal people with their mind, so that's what we try. So
Good mix.
and so to answer your question, yeah, the businesses that we have are actually a direct result of that. And I can give an anecdotal story here, for example, I have always had extremely high cholesterol, whatever that means, because no one knows anymore. And, they're like, oh, oh my God, my LDL was so high, dude, like it went off the print page, you know?
Really?
Oh yeah. And, but hey, you're looking at a dude who's pretty open myself. So it's like, did I find a way to download my genome and scan it in and look at all of the different alleles and match that to the Genome Project? You sure bet I did.
Wow, nice.
But I didn't have the gene for hypocholesterollemia, right? So that's weird. And so then it's like, okay, well then I went to go look at, I was like deep into Peter Attia for people who are familiar with him. And I'm like,
Yes.
oh my God, high cholesterol is one of his horsemen of death, or whatever. And so it's like, oh my God, let me try to get on Repatha. And I did all of these crazy things to get Repatha for free for a year. And then these doctors wanted to put me on these statins and, but then it was like my liver enzyme shot through the roof. And for people who are interested and have done this, like I was only doing the 10 milligrams of rosuvastatin, but it's like my liver still didn't like it. And then you have all this research coming out that cholesterol isn't the problem. It's the oxidation through inflammation. And it's like you just go down this, and nobody was willing to have a conversation with me about any of it, And so it's sort of like, how can you piece that, together and do something that you think is meaningful and, go for it. And so that's what we tried. And so we kind of live your question out a little bit, and,
Okay.
my wife too, it's like, she knew she wanted kids, and, having thyroid issues can lead to stillbirths or, the baby not coming to term, and no one cared. No one cared, dude. Her endocrinologist, which is what we see down in the States for thyroid issues, it's like 90% of your I'm making this number up, but it's like the majority, I should say, of the endocrinologists are concentrated in diabetes because that's where the money is,
Right.
And not to jump down this rabbit hole, but as you can tell, I have certain opinions about it.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because, and I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. On X or any social media platform, really, nowadays you have the fitness gurus
Mm-hmm.
who would tell you, 95% of your problems can be solved if you just work out and eat well.
Yeah.
Can you work yourself out? Can you exercise yourself out of burnout? Is that doable?
Yeah. Well, wow. That's a great question. What would I say to that? What I would say to that is, okay, I'll come at it from this direction. Hopefully this is helpful. For people who are experiencing negative emotion, and we could say that burnout is a type of negative emotion because it doesn't feel good to be in that, both physically or cognitively, let's say. We know that, like, for example, you have 5 parts of your kind of neurological makeup. You can think of them as little factories, but you have 5 factories of dopamine, okay, in your brain.
Okay.
You have a very important one in the back of your brain, and that controls movement, right? And so dopamine, as we know, is sort of the reward type of drug in layman's terms, but dopamine plays a very crucial role in movement, which is why when people are struggling with Parkinson's, the main drug that they use for that, or one of the main drugs that they use for that, is L-Dopa, right? So it's like increase the dopamine, you increase movement. But the reverse is also true. By actively moving, you can re-engage those dopamine circuitry, right? Again, this is a very layman's term. This is not like neurobiology
Sure.
101, but essentially a good rule of thumb is that by moving, you can increase positive emotion, which is why you said one of your healthy habits was walking,
Yes.
right? And so we know, of course, if you follow Dr. Rhonda Patrick and, Andrew Huberman and all those guys, the number that everybody's really throwing around these days is like 10,000 steps a day, right?
Yeah.
And so, and whatever, but, a lot of people, can't get there. And I think one of my frustrations that I have as a clinician, especially understanding more of the neurological side of behavior, you know, I have worked with people, man, who, it's like they can only get to their door. That's how they walk. It's like they so have a hard time implementing behavioral changes that we have to micro dose it down to, can you walk to your door and put on your shoes? Okay, we're going to
Right.
spend 2 weeks doing that. Can you open your door and step out on your porch and walk backwards back into your house? And so you have to build up the resiliency. Not everyone, because I know people love Jocko Willink, man, and he's a beast, that's for sure. But you know how many, it's like out of 10 people, you know how many Jocko Willnicks you get? You get one, and he's already there.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of motivational stuff, and his stuff is great in his leadership and its army, but not every male is built as a military combat war god. you know?
No, they're not.
And so you're going to have a hard time, trying to implement those things, or you may begin to feel guilty or shameful when you fall short of these massively huge goals that you're trying to create. And with January right around the corner, man, this is like negative emotion zone, right? Here's the one massive goal that I've been saving, but the goal is too lofty. And then when you fail to reach it, you're like, yeah, you see that, you son of a bitch, you are a piece of crap. And that's like the internal monologue that you tend to get. And you kind of have to help walk people, through that and out of that for them to build. So to answer your question, yes, movement and working out is extremely beneficial for the positive emotion. They are healthy habits, and it's not that they're coping mechanisms. You're actually just allowing your body to function more efficiently, and it feels good. So you can take a heavier burden. And if that's a coping mechanism, I guess you can sign me up.
So be it. So
So
be
be it,
it.
man.
Yeah.
It's like, I forget who it is, but to some degree, men are beasts of burden, right? It's like if you have something that's going to enable you to carry the load better or push the rock up the hill longer or whatever it is, then all to it. I would and all these people, I mean, it's like my wife and I, we were both really big into Tony Horton's P90X. You asked me earlier if age was a thing. Dude, I lost 65 pounds with Beachbody. I was in my 20s. I had a huge
Wow.
game changing, but the problem is that I stayed in a calorie deficit for 8 years, right? So it threw my hormones off. I got into an injury. As soon as that happened, I tanked into some pretty big physiological depression. Um, and I gained, after 10 years, it's like I found myself, I was 65 pounds heavier again. None of the weight would come off like it used to. It didn't matter how many calories I restricted. Um, so it was a pretty wild ride. So my wife has been very in tune with the Mind Pump guys, and they have this,
Oh yeah, I know those guys.
yeah, yeah. So we use a lot of their programs, and so when I converted over to not their aesthetic program, their anabolic program, which is just 2 days a week, building up to three, the weight started coming off, and so for me, using their program, it seemed like 2 days of really strong lifting with 5 days of mild trigger sessions, tend to work really well, and it tended to be a little bit more appropriate. Like with the Beachbody stuff, I only do that once a year now because it's 90 days, so I only do it for a quarter, and I make sure that I'm in shape. I don't do it to lose weight anymore because I can't, and my body will hate me for doing it. So I have to, like, the goal of doing, because I love me some P90X. I'm a huge fan. I love Tony. I just, he helped me in this very, very distinct part of my life, but I can't do it year round anymore. And I don't think that those programs were built with that type of wise mind, for that. So,
Yeah, I don't know how sustainable that program is, to
right,
be
right,
honest.
exactly.
Well, you're so right about this. And look, I think the human body was meant to move, right?
hmm
And not just 2 or 3 times a week, on a daily basis.
Yeah,
And
and
yet, so many of us are sitting in front of a computer all day at a desk job.
yep. And so my wife, she has a walking pad and a reasonable desk,
Good.
that we set up, which is great. And so she does that to definitely help that. And you said something so good. It's like, especially with your kids, that is what rough and tumble play is all about. And see, mammals have and the guy who did this, Jaak Panksepp, his great classic book, Affective Neuroscience. I mean, and who really discovered this. It's like, dude, it's intrinsic in males, right? It's the closest thing to what biological morality that I think that we have. I mean, it's not that. It's the closest thing to that, but it's like we have it hardwired in us to help us play. And so when you can stretch your kids out, or you're throwing them or pulling them, or they're pulling you, and whatever, it helps them, because your mind and your body are connected, right? And so to master parts of your body, and when I say master, I just mean to be able to understand your full length and scope of your movements. It's incredibly grounding, especially for
Absolutely.
kids, during those developmental years.
Yeah, I can attest to that 100%. Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. Let us know, where can people find you and what are you currently working on?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Right now, my only main social media is Mr. Mindmorph, which I thought was clever on X. And the only thing that I'll do is I'll give you, if it's of any interest, if any of these things resonated, I have this program called Fatherhood Rewired that I'm currently working on. It offers gut testing, blood testing, a personality test, and then 90 days to turn all those things into actionable behavioral plans for you and your family. I've discounted this bad boy for the holidays like 60%, so it literally just covers the cost of the lab and my time with the providers with the lab. And looking to build a new group. I'm hoping to get somewhere between 10 or 15 guys to go through this next thing and see how they like it. It comes with everything, courses, blood work, like I said. And the only thing that I'll have is just a link if I have some spots open for calls. If anybody wants to just chat about this and see, or have any interest of anything I said, I can give that to you. And the Calendly will be there, and then that's it. So my Calendly, my ex, man, I'm not a big account dude. I'm just trying
That's
to find
enough,
some
man.
dads to help.
That's
So
all you need.
yeah.
Awesome. Thanks again, man. Thanks for joining me on Dads with
Yeah,
Mics.
thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it.